Americans don't really know what inflation is. This is Libertarian View, your source of decentralized and distributed information. Inflation is the new trending word in Americans' political debate. You've probably seen its effect when you went shopping. However, do you really know what inflation really means? As Dr. Lawrence White from George Mason University explained, if you pick up an economic book from the 70s, you will find that inflation is the expansion of monetary base. But if you research it now, you will see the definition has been changed to the general increase in prices of goods and services. So why did it change, and which one of those are correct? Well, in order to understand why it's flawed, let's start with the current definition. A general increase of prices means that everything got more expensive. These can either be a literal increased price tag or by reducing the amount you used to get by the same price. We call that shrinkflation. However, that's not the whole story. If you have ever been to an economics 101 class, the first thing you probably learn is law of supply and demand. This law is like the law of gravity. You may not like its effects, but they are a reality. The law says that if a product has an increase in supply, it has a tendency of having its price lowered. But if supply gets lower, its price tends to go up. Now, at demand side, it's the opposite. If demand falls, so do the prices. But if it increases, you can expect a higher price for it. Let's say you want to buy a tomato and it costs 50 cents. The numbers are all fictional. But this year, there was a flood that harmed the tomato harvest. This reduces the supply, so you can expect the prices of tomato to increase because now tomatoes are a lot harder to find. So maybe you now need $1 for each tomato. On the other hand, let's say a new article from Harvard says that tomatoes cause cancer. It may be false, but because of it, some people will stop buying tomatoes. And if demand falls, so the prices. So how could inflation mean that all the prices are getting higher and higher? Is everyone demanding more of everything, or is that everything got rarer? None of those. That's the biggest problem with the current definition of inflation. It's defining only the consequences of the problem, not the cause of it. It would be like a doctor calling a disease fever. It is a symptom of a disease, but it's not a current diagnosis. To get that, we need to go back to the old definition of inflation. Inflation is in fact the expansion of the monetary base, translating it to plain English, money printing. You see, the monetary base is the amount of cash circulating through an economy. To simplify, let's think of an island with two people, one baker and one tailor. Each has $100. The baker produces 20 pieces of bread and the tailor makes 2 pieces of clothing yearly. So each bread costs $5 and each pants costs $50. In this case, the monetary base is $200. Let's suppose that a plane drops $1,800 on the island and the two people there share it equally. So each one has now $1,000. Now each islander can buy 10 times what they could before. However, that does not mean that the production of the island increased 10 times. So in time, prices will rise to 10 times what they used to be. So now the bread costs $50 and clothes costs $500 each. Notice how the prices have increased, but the exchange rate between bread and clothes remained the same. 10 breads equal 1 clothing. You can think of it this way. Money is a product, and when its supply increases, its value decreases because it becomes less rare. That's really inflation. When the amount of money circulating through an economy increases, all prices go up because money is valuing less. Now, how does that happen? There are some ways in which the monetary base can expand, but usually the only significant way would be by the government, aka printing money. And when we say printing money, we don't mean it literally. Of course, the government prints money every day, mostly because the bills you use become damaged over time, so they need to be replaced. But when we say money printing, we are talking about the government creating money out of nowhere. This process is very complex, and it involves the Federal Reserve, the banking system, and the government bonds. But for the sake of simplicity, let's say the Fed types some zeros at the federal government bank account. Then, the federal government uses this money to pay mostly their debts, but also public programs flooding the market with new money. So why has the definition of inflation changed over time? In case you didn't notice, information has gotten a lot easier to find nowadays. And if I simply say that inflation was the expansion of the monetary base, you probably wouldn't understand the real meaning of it. We can Google stuff up very easily, but not in the 70s. You probably could not understand how the amount of money circulating through an economy could be happening, but you could feel it when you go shopping and suddenly everything is more expensive than before. Now it's much easier to see how the government does that, so with time, the definition started to change. If you see the old definition and see the government spending a lot money than he got out of taxing people, you would quickly realize they are printing money, and that's bad because now the money you have in your pocket is worth less. However, the one raising the prices of product at the store is not the government directly. So the new definition redirects the anger that you are feeling towards the shop owner or the manufacturer instead of the government, the real culprit here. So now, every time you see the White House announcing a new X trillion dollars project, you already know what that means. But if you have been following the news for quite some time, you probably notice that the government has been printing money for a long time. Since the 70s, to be more precise. That's why the government creates some indexes to measure the amount of inflation, mostly the CPI, Consumer Price Index. But this index only represents some of the products in an economy. That's why when the CPI hits 3%, you may feel an increase of 10 or 20% in certain products that are not part of this index. But why are we seeing the effect of inflation now if the Fed has been printing money for such a long time? To understand that, let's backtrack a little bit. After World War II, most of Europe had an unpayable debt with America. The US did not want to repeat what happened after World War I, where the European governments printed a lot of money to pay up their debts. The amount of printing was so extreme that to buy one bread you would need a pushcart full of bills. This led people to become desperate, and that's one of the reasons why fascism was born. So how could the European countries pay up their debts without printing money? Well, back there, money was pegged to gold. That means you could exchange a certain amount of cash for gold. For example, the dollar was pegged at rate of $35 per ounce of gold. So every country had at least some gold reserved to guarantee the exchange of cash for gold. So instead of the US getting paid in European money, they received it in gold. But how would the other countries back the value of their money? all those currencies were no longer pegged to gold, but pegged to the dollar. You can say that's when the fluctuating conversion rate was born. Until then, you would compare money from different countries based on how much gold they value. Let's assume that $35 were worth 1 ounce of gold, while 1 ounce of gold was tradable for 25 British pounds. So the conversion between dollars and pounds would be $35 to 25 pounds. Because of this transfer of gold to the US and the money of many countries around the world being pegged to dollar, which was pegged to the gold in what came to be known as the Bretton Woods system, now the dollar was the dominating global currency. But that posed a limitation to how much money the US could print. It could only create new money if it had gold to back it up. At first, this did not seem to be an issue. However, with the ever-increasing expansion of the federal government, with the Cold War and the War on Poverty, which would need a video each to explain, the government started printing money beyond their gold reserves, fearing that US could not honor the deal with $35 per ounce of gold. Many central banks, starting with the French, asked to trade their dollars for gold. Knowing that they would not have enough gold, the conversion of dollars for gold was temporarily suspended some 50 years ago. Notice how this temporary suspension never ended. Because of it, the 70s were marked by many crises, especially the energy crisis. Many oil-producing countries no longer wanted to accept dollars for their oil, so the prices of oil, gas, and other commodities became very unstable. To secure dollar dominance, many countries in the Middle West were invaded. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's all based on the FBI and CIA documents from that time. Like it or not, it worked. The petrodollar system guaranteed the dollar dominance as the means of international trade. To understand the meaning of that, let's say a Brazilian wants to buy a smartphone from China. China would not receive Brazilian real as a means of payment, and the Brazilian probably do not have any yuans laying around. However, the Chinese would receive dollars for it, and the Brazilian probably could trade some of their currency for dollars easily. So, in this trade where nobody from the US is involved, the dollar was used to facilitate the process. Because of it, every country needs to have at least some reserve of dollars to exchange for their own currency. Okay, what does this whole explanation have to do with the reasons why inflation is hitting the US now? Because of Cantillon effect. You see, when money is printed, it takes a while for the prices to adjust to the new size of monetary base. Think of it like this. The first one to receive the new money can buy stuff at the normal price. However, as money circulates through the economy, the prices are getting higher, so the last person to receive this new money has to buy stuff for the already higher price. So it's kind of a taxation where the last receivers pay to the first receivers. Now, apply that to the global scale. When the Fed prints money, much of it flows outside the US, so the effects of the inflation will be more suffered by whoever gets it last. In this case, poorer countries with less money circulating. But because of the thing that must not be named of 2020, many production chains were impacted and global trade got to its lowest point in decades. So all those dollars printed by the US government did not have much place to go. So the effects of inflation, the rising of prices, was strongly felt within the US. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. In case you didn't know, this channel is from Brazil, and here we have seen the reality of inflation firsthand. You Americans are facing a 4% inflation rate recently. However, in the 80s, Brazil got that up to 4 digits. Prices used to change daily, and at the worst times, twice a day. So how did we fix it? By cutting spending, specifically privatizing a lot of state-owned companies. If the government spends less, it needs to print less, so inflation is reduced. The solution is simple, however, it's very unpopular. For politicians, spending less is not an appealing way to attract voters, and politically speaking, it's better to do the wrong thing than to do nothing at all. So if the government won't solve this issue, how can I protect myself from it? There are many ways. One of my favorites is to stop using fiat currency and change to cryptocurrency, aka Bitcoin. Notice how much Bitcoin has increased in value in the last years. Part of it comes from more people seeing value in this cryptocurrency, but the majority of it comes from the devalue of other currencies. Even though the dollar has been one of the more stable currencies of the world, it has lost 2,743.78% of its value since its inception. That's why your grandparents could buy a house with a couple $1,000, while you cannot find one for less than a couple $100,000. Every time the government prints money, they are taking value of your pockets. That's real inflation. Thanks for watching. This article was suggested and written by Liberal, revised by Paulo Almeida, and narrated by Rafael Oliveira. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video on your social network. If you want to be notified from other videos, hit the subscribe button and then the bell icon. See you soon!